I thought I was just picking up a pizza, but what I found on top of the box shattered everything I believed about my wife. Hey fellas, let me start with something real blunt. If people knew what kind of wreckage infidelity could leave behind, I think a lot of them would slam the brakes before ever crossing that line. The story I'm about to share? It's fictional, yeah, but it doesn't feel far-fetched. It could have easily played out in some quiet neighborhood in a house not so different from mine. It's a cautionary tale, a look at how one decision to betray can spiral into something no one ever expected. So here it goes. That morning started like countless others. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and flipping through the morning paper, mentally gearing up for another day at work. The smell of toast hung in the air, and from down the hallway I could hear my wife, Rachel, rustling around in the bedroom, probably picking out her outfit for the day. It was routine. Predictable. Comforting even. But then my eyes caught something on the front page, and just like that, the morning turned ice cold. There she was. Not Rachel, but someone who made everything hit close to home. I should have been surprised, but in truth I wasn't. My friend Mike had warned me the night before that something big was about to break, and when Mike gave his word, he always followed through. The headline read, "Local man found dead in garage." The victim? A guy named Brian Keller. Worked over at the Brookside Realty office. According to the article, he'd been discovered lifeless in his garage the night before, and the police were calling it a violent assault. No arrests. No leads yet. Just shock and speculation. Rachel worked at Brookside too. Same office. Same circles. I skimmed the rest of the write-up, but the words started swimming and my stomach tightened. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in front of Rachel's usual spot at the table, the same spot she sat in every morning for the past 5 years. A strange mix of sadness and reflection washed over me. I didn't know yet what exactly I was feeling, but I knew this day was about to veer far from normal. A moment later, Rachel floated into the kitchen, looking as stunning as ever. I'd be lying if I said she didn't still knock the breath out of me sometimes. Even after all our time together, 7 years since we met, 5 since we tied the knot, she had this glow that never faded. But we didn't say anything. That was normal now. For the past couple of months, silence had taken the place of the soft good mornings we used to share. After one especially heated argument over something as trivial as work-from-home schedules, a distance had settled in between us. It hadn't lifted. She sat down, picked up the paper, and I watched her eyes move across the page. Then they stopped. Fixed. And in a split second, everything about her changed. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the paper. Then, like a dam breaking, the words burst out. "Oh my God, no." Her face drained of color, and she looked like she was about to throw up right there at the table. I didn't say a word. Just sat there, frozen, watching the emotion crash over her like a wave she didn't see coming. The kitchen, once filled with the clink of mugs and the hum of appliances, fell silent, except for the sound of her shallow, shaky breaths. And even though I didn't want to admit it, I already knew this wasn't just shock. It was guilt. And I was about to find out why. As soon as she read that headline, Rachel bolted from the kitchen without a word. I heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway, followed by the sharp click of the bathroom door slamming shut. She was overwhelmed. I could tell. And honestly, I just sat there motionless. Not out of shock, but because deep down I already suspected this wasn't just horror over a news story. There was something more behind her reaction. I didn't know what yet, but I was going to find out. That wasn't the first time life had caught me off guard. Years earlier, I found myself tangled up in a different kind of mess, one that ended with me getting dragged into a police station, bruised and bloodied. Long story short, I'd been caught near a warehouse after hours. The guards assumed the worst, tried to stop me. I didn't resist, but they roughed me up anyway, laughing as they handed me over to the cops. The officers joined in on the jokes while I sat there, my ribs aching and my face swollen. They threw me in a holding cell until my folks showed up and bailed me out. Through it all, I stayed quiet. Refused to give up the name of the guy who'd talked me into it. Loyalty's a funny thing. It can get you in trouble and still feel like the right thing to do. I ended up doing 2 weeks in county for that stunt. Lesson learned. Rachel and we had our own ups and downs from the beginning. Our early days were rocky, filled with long silences, misunderstandings, and stretches of not knowing where we stood. Even with all that tension, we held back from anything physical during that first year. I guess it felt like we were trying to build something solid before rushing into anything. And to be honest, I respected that. When I started to really dig into her past, those long late-night talks where she finally let some walls down, I learned about the storm she came from. Her mother had abandoned her when she was still in diapers. Just left her in a church pew one Sunday and vanished. Rachel was raised by the foster system after that. No explanations. No closure. Just gone. Knowing that helped me understand why she was guarded. Why sometimes she pushed me away even when she didn't mean to. But when we finally got married, things were good for a while. Better than good. For about 9 months we were in that honeymoon phase, cooking dinner together, laughing at dumb movies, just being close. She had this new energy about her. Got really into her job and even started taking real estate courses on the side. I was proud of her. I thought we were growing stronger. But then, something shifted. It started subtle. She'd come home later, stop reaching for my hand like she used to, start sleeping closer to her side of the bed. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe it was just stress. But I knew better. That warmth, that connection, we were losing it. And the harder I tried to bring us back together, the more distant she became. One night, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to sit alone every evening." It cut deep. I didn't have a comeback. Just sat there, stunned. Our intimacy faded too. It wasn't gone completely, but it was mechanical. Lifeless. Like she was somewhere else even when she was with me. Then 2 weeks ago, she told me she'd be heading out for the weekend with some coworkers. Something about a real estate developer holding an orientation at a resort. She called it a networking opportunity. Said she'd be back Sunday night. I tried to be supportive, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. That weekend, my buddy Luke talked me into going out with him. Said I needed a distraction. We ended up at a place I never would have picked on my own, a flashy club with neon lights and velvet curtains. The kind of joint where girls in barely their outfits danced on low-lit stages and gave lap dances to anyone willing to drop a few bills. I sat there, nursing a beer and feeling completely out of place. Then this girl, barely looked legal, locked eyes with me and walked right up, swaying her hips like she owned the room. Luke elbowed me and laughed. "She's all yours tonight, Jake." But I couldn't do it. No matter how disconnected I felt from Rachel, no matter how much hurt or suspicion was eating away at me, I wasn't gonna betray my vows. That wasn't who I was. I excused myself, left some cash on the table and stepped out into the cool night air. Even then, I didn't know what Rachel was really up to. But deep down, my gut had already figured it out. "I'm sorry, Luke," I muttered, rubbing my temple. The yelling and the cheers gave me a headache. But even with the pounding in my skull, I had to admit, it was worth it. The Steelers pulled off a solid win against the Raiders, and for a moment, it felt like the perfect cap to an otherwise chaotic day. For a little while, everything else faded away. Luke, of course, was hyped beyond reason. He tried hard to get me to stick around with the rest of the guys, cracking open bottles and planning to drink until they couldn't remember their names. But I had to turn him down. Told him maybe another time. The truth was, I couldn't afford to stumble into Monday hungover, not with the pressure at work building the way it had been. Deadlines were closing in, my supervisor was breathing down my neck, and the last thing I needed was a whiskey hangover and bloodshot eyes in the morning meeting. But if I'm honest, there was another reason I wanted out of there. A much heavier one. You see, back home, something had already started to unravel. Something that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about the woman I married. The final blow came when I opened an email. One that contained a series of pictures, images I wish I could scrub from my brain, but no matter how many nights I've stared at the ceiling, they won't leave me. There she was, Rachel. On all fours. In our bed. The same stranger from the earlier photos was behind her, and the look on her face, God, it wasn't just lust. It was something deeper. Wild, lost in pleasure. Like she wasn't just cheating, but living a part of herself I had never been allowed to see. That expression burned itself into my memory. And just like that, all the love I had held for her turned to ash. Underneath the photo was a mocking caption. Service provided by the late Brian Keller's son. My chest tightened. I felt like the air had been ripped from the room. Rage didn't even begin to cover it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, trying to calm my nerves, but the shaking in my hand made it impossible to enjoy. So I slipped down the hall to the spare bedroom, the one I'd turned into my little workspace. I closed the door behind me, shut out the world, and sat in silence. This was where I started planning. Not just grieving. Not just hurting. Planning. Now, in this country, when someone's found guilty of a crime deserving of the death penalty, there are usually two options: execution or life behind bars. In my mind, I was preparing something that delivered both. No bloodshed. Nothing that would put me behind bars. But revenge? The kind that lingers and strips a person down slowly? That was the goal. I poured myself a glass of Jim Beam, skipped the television, and let the soft tones of a jazz saxophone fill the room. I needed clarity, and for that I needed quiet. Rachel could entertain herself for the evening. I had no plans of doing anything with her, not tonight, not ever again. When she eventually came home, she took one look at me, then scanned the room. She knew. She didn't say a word. Just turned and walked out the door. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't care if it was dinner, or back into the arms of Brian Keller's son. She was no longer my problem. Later that night, I remembered something that Brian himself once hinted at, not long before his death. He had pulled me aside at a company picnic, half drunk, and mentioned that Rachel and he had been working closely on a few projects at the agency. He chuckled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "You're a good man, Nate," he'd said, "but don't be too quick to trust everything that looks perfect on the outside." I laughed it off at the time. Told him I trusted Rachel completely. He just gave me this look, half pity, half warning, and nodded like he already knew I wouldn't believe him until it was too late. Brian's funeral was held that Tuesday morning. Friends, coworkers, even people I hadn't seen in years showed up to pay their respects. But for me, standing there in my black suit, watching his casket lowered into the ground, it wasn't just a goodbye to a man I once called a friend. It was the day I buried the last shred of the life I thought I had. I spotted Claire wearing that black summer dress, the same one she wore to my mother's funeral. I remember it vividly. But what struck me wasn't the dress itself. It was that she hadn't even asked if I wanted to go with her to Brian Keller's service. Not a word. She left the house early that morning, her face unreadable, her emotions locked away somewhere I could no longer reach. I thought maybe she needed time alone to process everything, to grieve, maybe. That's what I told myself. But the truth was far more calculated than anything I could have imagined. At exactly 11 a.m., while Brian's memorial service was likely just getting underway, someone dressed as Claire, flawlessly disguised, walked into a bank on the east side of town. She moved with confidence, approaching the counter like she belonged there. She handed over a transaction slip, requesting to withdraw $225,000 from our joint savings account. $225,000. Along with the slip, she presented what appeared to be a valid driver's license and passport. Both showed Claire's name, her face, her details. The bank teller, doing their job by the book, processed the withdrawal, unaware they just handed over a small fortune to a fraud. Or maybe, not a fraud at all. Part of me wanted to believe this was someone impersonating her. That Claire couldn't have done something so brazen, so cruel. But another part of me, the one that had been growing sharper, harder, more suspicious, was already piecing it together. I had no choice but to play my part. I'd learned long ago, during my younger days dealing with some shady characters back in Queens, that keeping up appearances was everything. I'd picked up a few tricks working the streets, especially the art of lying when it mattered most. And right now those old skills were proving useful. 3 days later, Detective Brendan Button stopped by my office. Middle-aged guy, sharp eyes, polite but probing. He probably came to size me up, get a feel for what kind of husband I was. Maybe even try to catch me off guard. He eased into the armchair across from my desk with a practiced smile. "Any word on Claire's whereabouts?" I asked, trying to sound more worried than I felt, forcing my hands to tremble slightly as I gripped my coffee mug. "I just can't believe she'd disappear like this," I continued. "Our marriage has always been built on love and trust. Claire wouldn't run. She couldn't." I gave myself a silent cue, tear up now. And just like that, my eyes welled and I let one trail down my cheek as I dropped my gaze to the desk. The detective sat in silence for a long beat, letting the room soak in the tension. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you think there's any chance her disappearance is connected to Brian Keller's murder?" I blinked hard. That was unexpected. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, stalling for time. He was already pulling back, shaking his head slightly. "Don't mind me. We had to consider all possibilities at first. You were on our list, I won't lie. But your alibi checked out." He said it flatly, but his tone didn't carry much conviction. I looked him square in the eyes, leaning forward now myself. "So you think Claire's gone because she's involved, and that maybe I helped her vanish?" He didn't answer immediately. Just held my gaze like he was waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. The tension broke when he stood and offered a tight nod, leaving without another word. Later that evening, I needed something to clear my head. The game was on, Sunday night football, and I didn't feel like cooking. So I called in a pizza. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a kid in a red uniform holding the box like it was sacred treasure. I tipped him well, more than I normally would. Maybe because I needed to feel like I still had control over something, even if it was just pizza. But as I stood in that doorway watching the delivery car disappear into the night, one thought echoed louder than any commentator on TV. Claire had disappeared with the money. And I still didn't know just how far she was willing to go. I made my way to the kitchen, the smell of melted cheese and pepperoni thick in the air. I flipped open the pizza box, already reaching for a slice, when something caught my eye. Resting squarely on top of the pizza was an unmarked envelope. At first, I thought maybe it was a receipt or some mix-up from the delivery driver. But the paper inside said otherwise. I tore the envelope open carefully, unfolding a single sheet of plain white paper. No letterhead, no signature. Just a typed message, short, direct. Be ready. Important meeting. Tomorrow morning. You'll be picked up. No time. No place. No sender. A chill ran through me. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of those few words settle in. My instincts, the ones I'd learned to trust, were screaming that this wasn't just some cryptic prank. Someone knew where I lived. Someone had a plan. And I was now part of it. The next morning, as promised, a black sedan rolled up to the curb outside my house just after sunrise. Without hesitation, I climbed into the back seat. The driver didn't say a word. He just nodded once and pulled away from the curb. We weaved through morning traffic in silence. I watched the city slide by through tinted windows, heart thudding like a war drum. 10 minutes later, the car slowed in front of a massive, gray warehouse tucked behind a chain-link fence and surrounded by cracked pavement. The driver, eyes fixed ahead, finally spoke, his voice flat and unreadable. Use the side entrance. I stepped out, the door closing behind me with a thud. No questions asked. No answers offered. The warehouse loomed large, silent but tense. As I stepped inside through the rusted metal door, the emptiness hit me. It felt cavernous. Hollow. Like a place built to keep secrets. At the far end, streaks of sunlight poured in through tall windows, illuminating what looked like an office built into the back wall. As I approached, the door creaked open and out stepped Carlos. He was dressed sharp, like always, but there was something colder in his eyes than usual. He didn't greet me with a handshake or a smile, just a small nod and a motion to follow. Inside I saw Claire. Her back was straight, arms crossed, but I noticed a faint glimmer in her eyes, a tear she hadn't quite let fall. That was the closest thing to a confession I'd ever get from her. No apology. No breakdown. Just that single drop of emotion betraying her otherwise icy front. Carlos spoke calmly, almost like he was discussing livestock. Don't worry. Wherever they're sending her, she'll be treated with the same level of care we give to our horses. That was all I needed to hear. I walked out of the office without another word. The same silent driver took me back, this time to St. Peter's Church. I arrived just as the 11 o'clock Mass was wrapping up, the final hymn echoing off the stained glass windows. I didn't stay long. Afterward, I drove straight home, head pounding, throat dry, and heart dragging like dead weight in my chest. I poured myself 2 fingers of Jim Beam, then another. Something inside me needed to be numbed, if only for a night. I kept thinking about how it all started. Claire and I once had a family that looked picture perfect from the outside. 2 kids. A dog. Family dinners. Vacations where we smiled for the camera even if things weren't perfect. We worked hard to hold it all together. I worked the night shift at the factory, and Claire took a part-time job at the local Walmart to help make ends meet once the kids started school. We did what we had to do. When we couldn't afford childcare, we sent the little ones to stay with family, always with a promise that things would get better. That it was only temporary. But slowly the cracks began to show. The bond we once had started to unravel. And one night, when I brought up some gossip I'd overheard, something about one of her friends dancing a little too close with someone at a party, Claire snapped. It's not like that, she said, eyes narrowed. You don't understand those women. I told her honestly, I didn't. I didn't understand what would make a married woman stray so close to that kind of temptation. She looked away, then back at me, cheeks pink with embarrassment. We'd been together 18 years by then. I knew every look, every twitch of her lips, every shift in her mood. So I asked her flat out, did you dance with any of those men? She hesitated, then finally whispered, it didn't mean anything. She cried that night. Told me it wasn't love, not like ours. Just a stupid moment of weakness. A mistake. But in that moment something inside me broke for good. Because love doesn't come back the same once it's been betrayed. I stood there just staring at her. My jaw didn't move. My hands hung limp at my sides. I couldn't even blink. It was as if my brain had just shut down. I gave my head a slow shake, hoping that somehow it would snap me out of the fog. But the truth had already landed, and no amount of denial could unring that bell. "I need time," I finally said, my voice low, almost apologetic. "I can't keep talking about this right now." Everything around me blurred. My thoughts spun in every direction, colliding into each other like cars on an icy freeway. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even hear what she said next, only that she was still talking, still standing there like none of it was her fault. The reality of what just happened refused to settle in. I couldn't fit it into any logical space in my mind. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I left the house and drove without direction for a while, just letting the tires hum against the road while my world fell apart in the rearview mirror. Eventually, I ended up on my parents' doorstep. They'd been married over 40 years, and while I didn't know every detail of their history, I knew enough to understand that this would shake them. The idea of Claire and I splitting up, let alone the looming word divorce, would land like a gut punch. Still, when I told them what had happened, they didn't ask many questions. Just gave me a hug and said, "You're staying here." They'd recently remodeled their basement into a cozy space with its own entrance, a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a little living area. It was supposed to be for guests, but now it was my safe haven. A place to breathe. That same evening, I called Martha, the lawyer I'd worked with on a few contract deals over the years. She was sharp, brutally honest, and someone I could trust with something this delicate. I needed guidance, legal and emotional. She booked me in for an appointment the very next day. Before we met, she gave me some simple advice over the phone. "For now, don't speak to Claire. Let your parents talk to the kids. Keep things calm. The less noise we make now, the better we can handle this later." So I asked my parents to reach out to the kids on my behalf. They spoke to our eldest, Amy, and passed along the message that I'd be reaching out to them all soon. No details. No blame. Just space. And grace. My heart ached thinking of the conversations ahead. How do you explain to your children that their mother betrayed you without making them feel like their entire foundation was crumbling? We had built what looked like a good life. And maybe at one time it really was. But under the surface something had rotted. When I sat down with Martha the next day, she got straight to the point. "If you want to keep this quiet for the kids' sake," she said, leaning forward, "we'll need to use this affair as leverage." Quietly. "You're in control here. We don't need to drag her name through the mud to get what's fair." I nodded slowly, processing each word. "You earn a good salary. She does too. With that in mind, we might be able to negotiate reasonable alimony, nothing excessive. If we push for settlement under irreconcilable differences, we can avoid the affair being public knowledge." "You're the expert," I told her. "I'll go with your recommendations." She smiled just barely. "We'll set the meeting. I'll handle the tone." No. That was the time she booked it. Neutral ground, professional setting. Claire and Jeff, her attorney, showed up together. Figures. Martha and I waited in the parking lot until they arrived. Jeff gave me a curt nod and motioned for me to wait before stepping out of the car. Like this was some kind of chess game and he wanted to control the first move. Once inside, we took our seats, me and Martha on one side, Claire and Jeff across from us. The silence between us was thick enough to choke on. Jeff broke it first, reaching across the table with an expression that barely passed for polite. "Good to see you again, Martha," he said, though it was obvious her presence made him uncomfortable. She didn't flinch. "It's always a pleasure, Jeff," she said evenly, sliding the folder of documents toward the center of the table. And just like that, the negotiation began. "I know how casually you like to approach things, Jeff," Martha said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet warning. "But before you go pushing terms, Adam and I will be meeting tomorrow to go over everything again thoroughly." Jeff didn't argue. Just gave a shallow nod and leaned back in his chair. Claire, Beth as she's known to most, finally spoke up once the air in the room had thinned out a bit. Her voice was soft, tired. And when she looked at me, there was something behind her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, something close to regret. "Adam, no matter what you think, I still love you," she said, her eyes misty. "I just needed space, for us to breathe. I thought maybe if we stepped back we could find peace again." I didn't look away. "No, Beth," I said firmly. "You made the decision the moment you walked out. You wanted freedom. And now you have it. But I've got one condition: don't use the kids as leverage. Don't drag them through this mess." "You don't have to worry," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be there for them, for Brad, for Amy, for all of them." I nodded because in that moment I believed her. When I sat Brad down later that week, I could see how much it hurt him. He was quiet at first, but his silence spoke louder than any words could. Eventually he asked, "So, what now?" "We're just going to need some time," I said gently, resting my hand on his shoulder. "But we'll get through this. Together." The divorce was finalized not long after. It wasn't easy, but I kept my promise. I stayed involved in their lives. School concerts, science fairs, birthday parties. I was there. Not out of obligation but because I wanted to be. Beth, to her credit, never stopped being a good mom. If there were more affairs, she kept them buried. She was always polite when we crossed paths, and I returned that respect. Still, my mind often wandered back to her, whether I wanted it to or not. It's strange how the heart doesn't just switch off. I tried, believe me. I went on dates, met good women, had moments where it felt like maybe I was ready to move on. But none of them ever quite reached me. Family holidays were always bittersweet. I loved seeing the kids, seeing them laugh and tease each other like old times. But then I'd catch a glimpse of Beth across the room, helping Amy with the dishes or joking with Brad, and I'd feel that old pull in my chest. One evening I went out with some coworkers. They insisted on checking out this upscale salon-turned-lounge, a place known for being packed with women, especially on Friday nights. I didn't expect anything. But when I stepped inside, scanning the crowd, I nearly dropped my drink. There she was. Beth. Standing with a group of women, laughing like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't anger that rose in me, it was just disbelief. I didn't approach her. I couldn't. Not that night. Time kept marching forward. Amy's wedding was still a year out, but the planning had already begun. When Beth brought it up to me, I blinked in surprise. "Isn't it a little early?" I asked. She shrugged. "You know how these things go. Venues book fast. Better to be prepared." I agreed. "Talk to Amy. Let her take the lead. This is her moment. Once you two get the details sorted out, I'll handle the finances." She nodded, and for a moment it felt like we were back on the same team. Not as a couple but as parents. As two people still trying to do right by the family we created. And in a way that was enough. I felt like I needed to be honest with Beth, completely and finally. I wanted her to understand that one dance, one moment of blurred boundaries, might seem innocent to her, but to me it said something much deeper. So I told her plainly, "Beth, your choices, they've shown me you want a different life. One with fewer lines. Maybe even other people. But that's not who I am." I made it clear, I believe in commitment. In staying loyal to one person. I'm not here to play games or explore lifestyles that go against everything I value. Especially when it comes to setting an example for our children. Their stability, their sense of right and wrong, that's always been at the heart of my decisions. "I think you need to find someone who sees things the way you do," I told her gently. "But that person isn't me." We parted ways. It wasn't dramatic. Just quiet like a book closing. Funny enough, about a year later I met someone else. We dated for a while and she was kind, thoughtful, and loved my kids. Eventually I worked up the courage to propose. I still remember her reaction. She looked up at me, eyes searching mine, and instead of answering she asked, "What does marriage really mean to you?" I paused. Because it wasn't just a romantic question. It was a challenge to everything I'd been through. And all I could say was, it means choosing someone. Every day. Even when it's hard. Now, I want to shift for a moment and share another story. A different man. A different kind of betrayal, but a father just trying to protect what matters most. My name's Ted. I'm 45, working in investment banking, and I've been married to Katie for 15 years. She's 40, a dedicated stay-at-home mom, and together we raise our 10-year-old son. Our story started where you'd least expect it these days, at church. A regular Sunday morning, bright and peaceful. She was quiet, reserved, and had this warmth about her that I couldn't look away from. We built a life rooted in faith and family. It was simple. It was good. But over the last couple of years things began to change, especially once Katie started getting more involved online. It started small. A few gym selfies, some meal prep photos, a few parenting tips. Friends from her fitness class encouraged her to share more. "You've got the look," they'd say. "People will follow you." Katie wasn't into it at first. She's always been more private. But over time she gave in to the pressure and created a public Instagram page. It took off faster than either of us expected. Suddenly strangers were commenting, liking, sharing. Her photos became more provocative. Subtle at first but then more revealing. She said it was about body confidence, about inspiring other moms. But I started seeing something else. She was chasing something. Then came the day that changed everything. I came home late after work and tried to have a calm conversation. I told her what I was feeling, that maybe the way she was putting herself out there, especially as a mother, might make our son uncomfortable one day. That maybe some things didn't belong on the internet. She didn't take it well. Katie snapped, accused me of being jealous, of trying to hold her back, of not wanting her to be happy. I was stunned. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the home we built together. The fight ended unresolved. And deep down I knew, this wasn't just about Instagram. That night I learned she had started uploading on an adult subscription site. A modeling account. The kind of platform that had nothing to do with confidence, and everything to do with strangers paying to see what should have been private. I felt sick. Not just as a husband, but as a father. Because this wasn't just her journey anymore. It was our son's too. It was just a regular Tuesday at the gym, or at least it was supposed to be. I was in the locker room trying to clear my head after a rough night, when I heard a voice from the next booth over. At first I didn't think much of it. Guys talk loud, especially when they've got earbuds in. But then I heard something that made my skin crawl. He was watching a live stream. Katie's live stream. I froze, my heart pounding. I heard him chuckle, make a crude comment, and then came the kind of noises that made it crystal clear he wasn't just watching casually. He was reacting, physically reacting. My stomach turned. I didn't wait around. I grabbed my bag and left the gym without even showering. Called into work and told them I was taking a personal day. No way I could sit behind a desk pretending everything was fine when my world was unraveling like this. By the time I got home, the babysitter was already waiting with our son. She handed me the notes from the day I paid her and she was out the door. I didn't even have the energy to make small talk. My son looked up at me confused. He could tell something wasn't right. I smiled as best I could, pulled him in for a hug and told him we'd be okay. Later that night, while we were watching TV together, he brought her up. Said some kids at school had mentioned something about his mom, and that one of the older boys made a joke he didn't understand. I sat there for a long second, unsure of what to say. Then I told him the only thing I could. No matter what anyone says, I don't want you to feel ashamed of who your mom is. But you don't have to explain her choices either. Just focus on being the best version of yourself. He nodded slowly, his eyes still full of questions. But he was strong. Braver than he realized. Eventually, our divorce was finalized. To meet the terms of the settlement, I had to sell the house. The place where we raised our son. Where we had birthdays and Christmas mornings and quiet Saturday mornings that felt like home. It hurt, but it had to be done. Rather than drag it out with monthly support payments, I opted for a one-time buyout. I wanted a clean break, for my son's sake and my own. No more constant back and forths. No reminders. Just closure. I was granted full custody, and I made sure to compensate Katie fairly for that. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want her trying to fight it later. So now it's just me and my boy. We've got a small place, nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. I take him to school, help with homework, and we've got our routines. He's adjusting. So am I. But Katie, she didn't take the separation quietly. One evening she called me out of nowhere. Said she missed our talks. That she'd made mistakes and wanted to know how I felt now. I told her calmly, but firmly, that our story was over. There was a time I loved her deeply. But that time had passed. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. I just didn't want her in our lives anymore. She called back from another number. This time I didn't pick up. Some people don't know when to let go. But I do. For me, for my son. I had to.